Welcome, everybody. As you trickle in to the webinar, you are attending our virtual webinar on Keystone Grants for Pennsylvania's Sacred Places with Karen Arnold. My name is Kevin Block. I'm the Director of Special Initiatives here at Partners for Sacred Places. I am with you here today in the Philadelphia office. With me is Emily Scheidak, the Director of Rural Initiatives, who is attending in the Chicago office at Partners. Emily, there are two offices. We also have staff all over the country. Partners for Sacred Places. You might know us already if you received the invitation. If you didn't, if you're viewing this webinar on YouTube, down the line, we are a national, non-denominational, nonprofit organization. Now we're over 35 years old. We've always been based in Philadelphia, but a national organization. We're dedicated to the sound stewardship and active community use of America's older and historic sacred places. And I just want to point out that active community use part is one of the reasons that Karen is with us today, because for these public grant opportunities, that active community use is really important. Intersection of faith, heritage, and community. All right.
We would love to stay in touch with you following this webinar, and here you can see a few opportunities to do that. If you aren't already on our mailing list, you can find that on our website listed here, as well as our social media. Those QR codes will link to some of those. And one of the things that we would love to be in touch with you about coming up soon is an announcement for the Pennsylvania's Faithful Fund, which will be a grant opportunity for purpose-built religious properties in rural areas of Pennsylvania. More information on that coming soon. So if you sign up for updates, we will be sure to keep you updated as we have more to share. And with that, we would like to extend a warm welcome to Karen Arnold today. Karen manages the Keystone Historic Preservation Grant Program at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, PHMC. So thank you, Karen, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I think it should be a good conversation, and hopefully that your attendees can find their way through our Keystone Grant Program too. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm going to rely on Kevin to advance my slides. So my appreciation goes to all of the staff at Partners as well. Okay. So without further ado, so I'm Karen Arnold. I'm with the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, and you can move right ahead, Kevin, to the next slide. And the grant program is actually housed in a bureau within the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission called the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office. And our work works with many different program areas that really further historic preservation and historic structures throughout the Commonwealth. And I bring this to the point of forefront as you're kind of thinking about our grant program and learning our dialogue and the things that we're interested in. So in addition to the grants itself, we administer federal programs that deal with historic preservation, like the National Register of Historic Places, compliance under Section 106 of the National Preservation Act, and then the programs that you might be much more familiar with, which would be our state historical markers, those blue and gold roadside markers that sometimes we call them history on a stick, where it's a brief blurb about the history, and a lot of religious properties throughout Pennsylvania actually have those markers. I live in Lancaster City, and I think every one of our downtown churches has been granted a marker at some point, long before some of the requirements of that program had changed. But what's more interesting in our programs, of which I think have a lot more popularity, of course, are the incentives, which encourage property owners to continue good, sound stewardship of their historic properties. And that includes our historic tax credits for commercial properties, our income producing, and then those who you're interested in and could apply for are our grant programs. Next slide, Kevin. And the one that's of most interest and correlates often with our religious properties are the Keystone Historic Preservation Grant Program. I should share with you that this program was started in 1993 as a dedicated revenue stream to support important conservation and recreation projects across the Commonwealth. Somehow historic buildings got thrown into the mix, and we're very grateful to that. So it's the Keystone Recreation Park and Conservation Fund, and we share this revenue stream with a lot of different state agencies. It does, for the most part, really do develop local parks and trails throughout the Commonwealth. And then our sister agencies with the Department of Education for libraries and the State System of Higher Education for our partner PASHE state schools also use this funding stream for capital projects. PHMC also has a very small share, and we use it to do capital projects at our own sites and museums, much like the Ephrata Cloister. And if you're not familiar with the Cloister, it's a PHMC-owned museum. It's the Ephrata Cloister is sometimes called the Ephrata community. It was a religious community established in 1732 by Johann Conrad Weissel in Ephrata, which is now Lancaster County. We are looking at the picture of the women's building and the meeting house, and it operates as a museum. If you've never had a chance to go see it, I certainly encourage you. It's very interesting. Next slide, please. Throughout the grant program, I think we've holded a portion of our funds to really go for public grants. It's been a nice mixture. About half of it goes to our own sites and then half are open as a way to really help our partners maintain their historic buildings. Um, Over the course of the 30-year history, I have granted over 1,000 public grants, over 52 million in funding throughout the Commonwealth. And over that time, religious buildings and former religious buildings account for just under 8% of our allocation. In many states, religious properties are excluded from state-sponsored grant programs, but Pennsylvania does encourage you as applicants, especially if the property is historically and architecturally significant beyond its function as a place of worship. Often, as you know, these buildings are anchors in their community and provide important educational and interpretive activities as well. And our allocation in the public side of these grants have really increased in the last couple of years, largely to the commitment of our executive office and our legislative partners. Last year, our allocation was just under 2 million, and we're hopeful in state fiscal year 25 and 26 to share that same allocation. Next slide, please. The key reason why this grant program was established was because there wasn't a dedicated revenue stream to assist in preservation of significant historic resources. And the enabling legislation really focused on capital projects that were beyond cyclical maintenance. So in other words, if you had a large roof project or masonry project that was really outside the scope of maybe a smaller museum to be able to do, this was the revenue stream that would catch that up. Um, and it focuses on rehabilitation of historic properties, the preservation or restoration under those set standards, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But more importantly, we wanted to see this revenue stream that would help foster preservation trades so that there were actually people in workforce who could do these projects. And that's really been an important facet of our project. Um, and so what you want to remember as you're looking and considering this, if this is a good opportunity for you, is that you're building a good, strong project team that has capable contractors who are helping you complete that project. And most importantly, this is public dollars being invested directly into the preservation of these buildings. And so to make sure that your project might work with it, the legislative intent was always that the public could view and enjoy historic properties. So as Kevin mentioned before, you want to make sure that your historic place of worship is open to the public and has a lot of engagement beyond just your immediate congregation. Next slide. I think it's important to remember that our typical grantees, of course, are historical organizations. We do fund colleges and universities and conservancies and historic preservation organizations, but the vast majority of our applicants are historical societies or museums. We've always kept religious institutions in that funding mix. Sometimes they are standalone 501c3 organizations that are created just to deal with the long-term stewardship of historic buildings, but we've also funded smaller congregations that they themselves are eligible applicants. We also fund local municipalities who might also have the county courthouse or city hall that are thrown into that funding mix. So you are competing in a competitive grant application with a lot of very diverse types of organizations that are all like you, focused on preserving their historic building. I will put a caveat just so that you remember that because the funding goes to our own properties that, if you're an associate group of our, one of our own sites, or if it's state or federally operated property, they're not eligible for this particular round of funding. Next slide, please. The enabling legislation had a couple other caveats within that we also follow. For the most part, they probably don't pertain to you. One of them was that we wanted to make sure that the organization who was receiving the fund was had the capacity to complete it. And so fledgling organizations that hadn't been incorporated for at least 5 years were ineligible to receive funding. Obviously, Marion Meeting well exceeds that and is a past applicant as well. Also, because the projects were only supposed to be focused on historic buildings, we use that definition of those that are listed in or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. I'll talk a little bit more about that in our next slide. But the other thing to keep in mind, because that legislative intent was really to make sure that the public could get access and enjoy those historic sites, is that they're open on a regular basis, not less than 100 days per year. Um, I think in their mind, a smaller organization might at least have operationals on Monday, hours on Monday and or Saturday and Sunday over the weekend to welcome the public. And I think most religious organizations can also meet that stipulation, whether your full day of worship might be Sunday, but you might be opening your doors for a lot of mission-based work throughout the week too. And that certainly meets those provisions as well. If you are dealing with a historic building or a historic church that might have been shuttered for a number of years because of condition, do know that the grant program might be an opportunity for you to complete those capital projects and get the door reopened. It's especially helpful if during the course of the application process that as a result of that grant funding, you'd be able to open that building again for visitation. Next slide. As I mentioned previously, that the eligibility requirement is that the property has been listed in or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. It's sort of the baseline documentation of what is considered historic within the program. And of course, most religious properties achieve significance in the National Register program because of their architectural significance, but also for their cultural or ethnic association, or simply because they're part of a surrounding historic district. The key to remember within the program that churches and synagogues do not simply derive their significance because of their function. If this is a sort of new idea for you, don't hesitate to reach out. I've given you some helpful hints about how to search to whether or not you can find out your property's National Register status, but you can also contact our office and directly to me, and we can look to see if perhaps the building has been evaluated years ago and maybe the current leadership isn't aware of that, or if you're part of a surrounding historic district and you're just part of that contributing resource to it. It all works the same. We also see applications from a few of the churches within Pennsylvania who are considered National Historic Landmarks, which is the highest tier in evaluation in the National Register program. Next slide, please. So the mere meat of the program itself is how much can you ask for? the construction, we actually have two categories of support through the Keystone Grant Program. The first, of course, is the construction category, and that is by far the most popular within that we see applications from. Requests can be from 5,000 to 100,000, and they do require a 50-50 cash match. And that's largely to help you know that these are reimbursable grants, and having that cash match helps you continue your project, and you request reimbursements from us as your project moves along and forward. And again, these are intended to be beyond uh, s- cyclical maintenance. So if your project might be, and I recognize they're expensive, a simple painting, exterior painting of your wood features, know that they don't actually, they wouldn't be considered eligible unless they're using, there's requirement for complex carpentry repairs that might be a part of that as well. And then the two things can be folded together. It really is meant to be larger size projects that are probably beyond just the capacity of the congregation to fund itself. But again, this really is meant to help quality preservation work happening across the Commonwealth by trained craftspeople. So you want to make sure that you're building a project that has a good project team in place, and more importantly, they're following typical preservation accepted practices. All work within the grant program has to meet what is known as the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic buildings. Sometimes it's really easy for our museum partners who are, following the restoration standards or preservation standards and keeping that building exactly as it is to meet those. For religious properties who might need to have larger code requirements or things, you can certainly invoke what are known as the rehab standards, which are a little bit more flexible, allows for modern code inflection, but you still have to remember that they all still have to be very sensitive to the historic features and characteristics which make your historic building important. As I mentioned before, we are part of the Commonwealth system. We're a Commonwealth agency. So all of our grant funding requires prevailing wage performances. So as you're looking and considering this, just remember that your labor rates might be higher than you would think because you're paying fair labor practices as part of the project. Next slide, please. Things that aren't eligible within the Keystone Grant Program are new construction. So if you were hoping to apply for the Historical Commission to build a new addition that might house an educational wing or other feature of your congregation might need, it wouldn't be eligible for funding. We also can't fund new construction or reconstruction. So if perhaps you lost a building through fire or other catastrophic loss, but you have good documentation and photographs, unfortunately, this isn't the revenue stream that would help you rebuild a lost historic resource. As I mentioned again, routine and cyclical maintenance aren't eligible activities under the grant program. It's really meant to be large-sized capital projects that are helping you manage the program or managing your building. And unfortunately, site work of non-historic features such as parking lots, sidewalks, or landscape plantings would not be eligible also. Other of our state sister agencies use their share of the Keystone Grant Program to, they're all often named Keystone as well. They might use their allocation to allow grantees to come to them for property acquisition. And unfortunately, that's not an eligible activity under the PHMC's share of the grant program. Next slide, please. One of the important facets of the grant program too that I like to share right away so that as you're considering it, we do ask our grantees to sign what is known as a preservation covenant or agreement that grantees would complete. It's recorded at your recorder of deeds office, and it's a legal document that is ensuring that your congregation will keep the property in good repair for a term of 5 or 10 years, that you'll be continually doing maintenance. It will stay publicly accessible, and any future projects are done in consultation with our office to ensure that not only that you're considering ground disturbance aren't impacting archaeological features of your historic resource, and that continual work will be done in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards. There are some religious organizations who are not comfortable completing such a document. I can share with you a copy of what this document looks like that you can take to your diocese or synod and make sure that their legal counsel are comfortable with it before you go through the exercise of completing a grant application. This provision is not negotiable. We certainly want to make sure it's not meant to be retribution, but really to that you have access to our staff so that you can continue your good stewardship of your historic building. Um, uh, the only other thing I want to mention about the preservation covenant is, in many cases, our churches are subsequent applicants again, and we just issue a new covenant agreement. So that's one of the nice things about the Keystone Grant Program is that, it's not a one and done opportunity for you. We do see applicants come back, much like Great Conawago Church, maybe 10, 15, 20 years later after their first project when they have another sizable construction project to come through that they want to come and back through, and we can certainly accept the application again to them. Next slide, please. In addition to the construction category, we also offer a much smaller grant category, which are the planning or pre-development opportunities. So it uses a separate application, but it does build on a lot of the same requirements of their construction category. Again, it has to be associated with a National Register listed historic resource, but you can see that the requests are much smaller. They're 5 to 25,000. They also require a cash match, but that prevailing wage requirement is not included in it. And this was really meant to help our smaller organizations, either religious organizations or even smaller museums, complete some of the planning or pre-development activities, such as historic structures reports or building plans and specifications for a larger construction project that might be out of the norm for your skill set to manage. We've also funded something at the Grace United Methodist Church here in Harrisburg, which was with Partners for Sacred Places and looking at adaptive reuse strategies for sections of the building that they don't use and whether or not they're community partners who might be able to better serve those sections of the building that they don't use beyond their Sunday morning activities. It's been really helpful, especially with smaller organizations who might have a really large structural issue, and they've got to work with a preservation architect to repair that. And they want to make sure that they understand the costs that are associated with it and that it makes them much more successful in fundraising, not necessarily only in our program, but actually working out and reaching out into the community as well, who might be interested and engaged with helping complete that project. And you might be able to have all those I's dotted and T's crossed before you even go out to begin your capital campaign. We see a lot of religious organizations coming through with this as well, and I certainly encourage those applications also. Next slide, please. I do want to share that we have been, as I mentioned, in existence since 1993, so we do maintain an annual application deadline of March the 1st. We're still waiting for the Commonwealth budget to pass, so there's a little bit of uncertainty for our program for next year. But we're hopeful that we'll have an allocation. And more importantly, PHMC recognized that this consistent schedule is very helpful to you. So you should anticipate that we'll be opening the application portal on December the 1st of 2025, with an application due date of March the 2nd of 2026. Similarly, if you're selected for funding, those recommendations are sent to our commission in their June meeting. So you'd most likely hear shortly after that date whether or not you've been selected for funding. But what's really important for you to recognize is that there's a standard grant performance period, and that is September the 1st, 2026, with a 24-month implementation period. So you'd be able to start your project and to start requesting reimbursements for activities that happen between the dates of September the 1st of 2026, but you'd have to have your project completed by September 30th of 2028. That might help you plan whether or not this is a good time for you, or if you want to look maybe in a little bit later on to see if there might be a better opportunity for you then. Well, very good. We're going to move to our next section. And Kevin, if you want to move the slide forward, I want to talk in a little bit more about the application process. We use an electronic single application for assistance. It's pretty common across a lot of state agencies to utilize this. Um, if you're not familiar with grant portals, they can be a challenge, so make sure you leave enough time to prepare it. They work best in Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. So if you're using Mozilla or Firefox or some of those other um, um, internet search engines and applications, it's not as compatible, to say the least. But what's nice about using this type of portal is that there's a consistent grant process. It's the same across several different agencies, and you'll know what's to expected. You can upload attachments to it, and most importantly, you have access to a customer service team. So if you're having technical difficulties with the portal, they're available to talk to between the hours of 7 to 6, which is wonderful. They're very helpful if you've gotten locked out and you can't retrieve your username or password. But what I do want to share with you is, you can look at the application, see what the questions are. I often recommend that you use Microsoft Word or something else to kind of gather your thoughts and write out the longer text sessions, because these grant portals have this horrible timeout feature. So if you're working on a page very diligently for more than 20 years, it'll time out and it won't have saved any of your work. So I like to share that with everyone. It's happened to me as a grant writer, and I don't want it to happen to you too. It's a little it's a little frustrating. So that's the one thing that you always have to keep in mind with our application process. Next slide, Kevin. So what's included within this application? We are asking you to build a very strong project narrative. And what I want to share with you, most importantly, as a religious organization, is that you want to start thinking of your building holistically, and the importance of your property historically, architecturally, and culturally, largely because that's how our museum partners and other applicants are also presenting their program. So it's important to share how the building or whatever the problem or area that you're proposing for a grant submission is used for the organizational mission. So let's say that perhaps our grants review panel are used to dealing with historic properties, but they might not know the importance of your particular church. So be very specific about why it's important to the community, who visits there, what the current condition is, and what's being proposed to address it. So let's say, for example, that you've got a leaking slate roof that's leaking into the main sanctuary space, and you've got to close off a section of it to deal with the leak. It's important to understand that that's really impacting how you're able to use that building and how you are planning to correct the corrective measures that you're proposing. So if it's a complex slate roof and the flashings are leaking, or do you need to, remove certain sections to repair and replace that copper flashing? And then from there, once that's repaired, you'll come inside and replace and repair the deteriorated plaster that was damaged from it. They'll want to make sure that sequencing is done correctly and that it's appropriate to the architectural character of that building. The other example I might give you, especially within a cemetery, if you're stewarding a historic cemetery and the cart path is damaged so that you can't get visitor circulation within that cemetery safely anymore. That's important to know that, maybe you're directing users to a different entrance gate because you can't use that gate anymore until the block stones are repaired. And that's important to understand what limitations are occurring because of the condition. We all understand that deferred maintenance unfortunately happens, and that or sometimes catastrophic repairs suddenly need to or creep up and that you have to address it. So it's important to share with us the challenges that you're having, and that it's nice to know that you're addressing those, especially if you've had to do phases of that project before, and that this is a continuation of that larger project that you're seeking support for. Um, we do ask you as an applicant to share photographs to support that the assertions of the condition, and it's helpful to show those that are, if it, especially if it really is deteriorating, and that it helps demonstrate the importance of your particular project. Next slide, please. We also ask you to be very specific in the type of project details and how that work will be undertaken, much like my explanation of the previous example with the slate roof. And I can't emphasize this enough, that, it's helpful to know that exactly what your contractor is proposing to do. So if, for example, your project is proposing a window restoration, it's nice to know if that you're including a discussion that there's a number of broken panes of glass, and that the number of those, perhaps, how your contractor is planning to repair them, whether or not it's just glazing putty that has to be replaced, lead caming, if they're stained decorative glass windows. And it's helpful to include an inventory of these differing conditions. Are the windows worse on one side of elevation of the building? I mean, are there different scopes of work depending on the condition of whatever window and how it needs to be repaired? That's very important. And especially if your contractor is going to have to be making Dutchman repairs to the damaged tiles, or are we just being able to repair it using wood consolidant. And or in some cases it's very possible that maybe one or two windows are in fairly good condition, and then maybe the frames just need to be scraped, sanded, primed, and painted. It helps justify your budget numbers and your request amount to have a better idea exactly what that contractor has to do. And remember, everything comes back to the Secretary of Interior standards. So as part of your project narrative, when you're explaining the scope of work, you want to be able to say how whatever that scope is meeting the standards as well. And finally, maybe here's a good example of the former East End Baptist Church, who had masonry repairs that were required on their tower. They had some vegetation growing up. I'm sure you've all been in some situations where that happens. So they were going to need a masonry contract to could come out and safely remove that vegetation and then repoint that masonry. And the questions that were included within their grant application was the mortar specifications, and what the experience of their contractor was to ensure that they wouldn't be doing more harm in repairing the masonry than what was currently the situation. Next slide, please. One of the important things that I've continually talked about are something called the standards for the treatment of historic properties. And these, I wanted to share a few minutes about what these things are. There are a set of 10 standards that were developed, gosh, probably back in the 1980s, that are your basic rules of thumb of how to manage and maintain a historic building appropriately. You can find them easily online from guidance from the National Park Service or even our website. But again, if you're applying for the grant program, remember that all proposed work is reviewed to ensure that they are in compliant with the standards. And perhaps if you're submitting an application and you're not particularly sure of the standards, I would certainly encourage you to reach out and build a project team with people who are either architects or contractors who are familiar with that. If your project is selected for funding and perhaps there might be something that is out of the norm for the standards, just know that we might need to be negotiating your scope of work so that it becomes in compliance with the standards. Next slide, please. So again, that project team is really important. We do allow you to include some money in your grant budget, up to 20% of your soft costs in the construction category, to help with construction management, so that your architect or engineer who's able to make sure that everything is moving smoothly with your project. So please keep that in mind, that you can include them in your project budget. And you are over our municipal partners are able to self-select and build your project team and share that with us in your grant application. So if you've not, hopefully they've been able to identify what the scope of work is for you. You can include their resumes or CVs within the project, or include within the project narrative what other similar projects they've worked on. And if as you're developing this application and you're just not sure you have adequate planning in place, you can always consider applying in our project category instead to hire your consultants to really make sure that they've adequately assessed the situation and can deal with the project itself. Oh, you can go right ahead, Kevin, to the so those professional services, as I mentioned, are really helpful. So you can make sure that they have experience with the standards, they have those adequate and comprehensive documentation in place to support that. And our grant review panel do often look at their resumes and CVs to make sure that they have got similar projects that they've worked on. Um, Much like the congregation Rodef Shalom, who was doing a restoration of their decorative ceiling, their consultant and contractor had other projects that were very similar, high-end ceiling restorations that they were familiar with, and that could or demonstrate that they could complete the project appropriately. Next slide, please. Your project also, remember if we mentioned that you had that 24 months to complete your project. So our panelists are also looking at your project planning and schedule, and those preliminary assessments will help you as well. So you can make sure that those plans and specifications are already done. Um, uh, they often, if you're waiting until you're funded and ready to start on September and you don't have your plans finished, it delays your project. So we certainly are looking at those applications who might have a good plans or specifications already developed. If it's a very large project and maybe you're looking for grant support for just a portion of it, it's helpful to have an understanding of what your proposed schedule is, if there are prior phases that were completed separate and before, or much like liturgical calendars have quiet times where you certainly wouldn't want to have a very active construction project going on. If there will be quiet times within the calendar year where you're not expecting any contractors to be working because of the interaction with what is happening elsewhere in your building. And one final thought, don't forget that your project would have to be finished by September 30th of 2028 so that you have built in that 2-year period within your project schedule. Next slide, please. What's consistent about all of our project is that we do consider the community benefit beyond preservation need and how our grant funding might be able to assist you in leveraging additional funding. We're interested in making sure that your building is in good condition so that it can increase visitation and and by being there. So as you're building your project narrative and talking about the community benefit, it's helpful to know who else uses that building beyond your immediate congregation. So, if you're St. Nicholas Croatian Catholic Church, they have some fascinating murals within it that they even partner with the Society to Preserve the Millvale Murals, and they do art presentations that talk about the social justice and artistic qualities of these murals. That's a nice partnership, and the continual project that we had done and funded with the Catholic Church was to replace their roof, largely as an opportunity to protect the historic murals that were inside as well. So share with us who comes to use your building, even the ones that might be a little bit different from just your religious Sunday worship times. Do you sponsor AA meetings in other parts of the building? Do you welcome organ concerts within your sanctuary space? And then you can also, in addition to including those numbers of those people who visit that site, include letters of support as well. Our grant review panel are always very interested to see how many different and diverse communities use these historic buildings, especially religious institutions as well. And those those letters of support can include a broad spectrum throughout the community as well. And most importantly, remember those letters that are including people who are hired to do the work, actual work on your building, aren't as important as those who are actually using the services of maybe your nonprofit partners that you open the doors to as well. And surprisingly enough, I've been managing this program for almost 18 years now, and every grant review panel really does weigh those letters of support very strongly. They're always very interested to hear how these buildings are being used. So, next slide, Kevin. I want to make sure we leave time for questions, so I want to wrap up these next two couple things quickly. But I want to share with you that our program is beholden to what is known as the Pennsylvania Statewide Plan for Historic Preservation. We just recently issued a brand new plan. It's a statewide focus that covers 10 years, and it really is dealing with historic preservation spectrums across the Commonwealth. It used a lot of public engagement about communicating with people who they felt were what makes Pennsylvania landscape and our historic buildings important, and what we as an office and we as the Commonwealth can do to ensure that historic buildings were preserved and are used. And we had a lot of feedback from partners who maintain historic resources and of religious buildings as well. And if you want to go to the next slide, Kevin, too. A lot of the things that came out with the goals and objectives of the statewide plan, you can certainly see might not immediately pertain to historic religious institutions, but we are always including some of those goals within the thought process that follow you as well. And all of our funding has to somehow further a project that marries with the plan, which is why I'm bringing this up. But there's some, hopefully you can easily find yourself in this plan. But most importantly, it's goal 2, number C, letter C, when we're encouraging property owners for good stewardship. And I think the grant program is a good fit that really ensures that that's happening. Next slide. One of the other requirements is something that's very exciting. Obviously, we're about to embark in the semi-quincentennial, so we ask all of our grantees to identify how your project fits into the themes of the America 250 celebration. And I realize that's a little difficult for some religious organizations, not always, but some. Um, uh, but you don't necessarily limited to those organizations who were in existence in 1776. We certainly we have identified the themes from the American Association of State and Local History that really talks about other ideas about what brings history, and it's engaging with the community as well. So I want to share that with you too, that you'll be asked to do that as part of the application. So to kind of wrap up before we go into questions, Kevin, do you want to go to the next slide? I want to share with you the things that you want to keep in mind if you're building a grant application, that you want to make sure that you include project personnel, consultants, their resumes, that you have good documentation of the challenges that your building has, that you've developed a strong fundraising plan. You don't necessarily have to have your grant funding, your match totally in place by the time you make an application. You just have to have a fundraising plan in place that you can share with our grant review panelists. And again, you want to make sure you have your engineering reports or architectural plans or contractor estimates that help verify what those cost estimates are again. And again, you can't forget about those letters of support. They're instrumental in helping share how important you as an organization and congregation are to your community. Next slide. I want to also wrap up with what our selection process looks like. They are not reviewed by internal grant staff. We actually use an independent peer review panel members. They include preservation architects or municipal officials or our historic architectural review board representatives, and we try to have a regional distribution of panel members to make sure that we reach all corners of the Commonwealth as well. We share those evaluation guidelines with our panelists, but they're also included in the grant application portal too. So you can see what they're using to make their funding selections and criteria as well. Next slide. And we ask them to look at the quality of the application. Please proofread and make sure that you've answered all the questions that have been asked of you. They look at the planning and making sure that you have a good understanding of what the project is and that you really have developed a good scope of work to address what the issue is. And as we've mentioned several times before, we look at the community benefit and whether it's a good use of Commonwealth funding too, as you're considering it. And then I think one final slide. So if you're considering an application, I want to share with you what really is really competitive. You're always able to reach out and talk to me about whether or not you think it's a good project or kind of vet that project and your project team. As you're developing your application, make sure it's concise but very complete, and make sure that you're including all of the required information and attachments within the application. I've tried to lead questions to you to make sure that you understand, that you can share how the building's used, why it's important in your community, and include photographs and all of your supporting documentation that helps make and build that good case for support. Next slide. I do want to share that we have some expectations. I don't just write you a check and let you go on your way. If you're selected for as for a grant, you're execute a grant contract or agreement with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which includes all of those provisions, including the prevailing wage requirements, and you and your grantee, as the grantee, are agreeing to that you'll abide by all of those. You will have to create a vendor number and set up banking information on that vendor number so we have a mechanism to pay you your reimbursements. I mentioned before that you don't have to have your matching funds in place. You can have them. We hope that you have them by January of 2027 if you're selected in this next round of funding, and then that we require you to do that covenant and then submit quarterly and final reports so that we can see your progress as you move forward. Next slide, Kevin. I do share as part of this a couple places where you can go for additional information about the grant program and additional help, including in addition to this training, we have some standalone training modules that help you understand how to navigate through the application itself, what the standards are, and that I certainly encourage you to take a look at too. They're available from our website to links to our YouTube channel. And then of course you can always reach out to myself if you have questions about the grant program itself, or if you have problems with the application portal, you can always reach out to our friends with the Enterprise eGrant Customer Service Center. They're very helpful as well. And Kevin, I think we're ready for questions then. I left 10 minutes as a strong amount.
I think that Kevin might be dealing with some technical difficulties, but we're just going to remind folks to tap any questions or type any questions into our Q&A. And if Kevin, you're back and you want to take over reading out the Q&A for Karen to answer.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. That's Maddie Hinson, by the way. That's our other colleague, Philadelphia Art Office at Partners. We have a complicated first question, which I'll read out. And I think it's addressed both to Emily and to Karen, which is great. This is from John Rhodes. A few questions about the PA Faithful Fund. Number one, is it connected to the State Historic Preservation Office? Will it require the same compliance standards as an application to the SHPO? Is the PA Faithful Fund dependent on all the PA state budget passing? And then the other part of John's question is, it's a question specific to the SHPO applications. We're a historic church building that celebrates the Welsh heritage of its founders. We have close partnerships with the Cambria County Historic Society and the local church. We're not typically open 100 days a year, though, because we're entirely volunteer run. Do some applications partner with other orgs to help fulfill that requirement? Can you share any examples, Karen, who we might be able to contact and learn how their partnerships work? So maybe I'll ask Emily first, and then we'll go to Karen.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So briefly, that program is something that will be opening soon. You didn't miss the timeline because I did not give one. We anticipate that it will be within the next couple of weeks, but we don't have that definitively laid out yet. So I would recommend, if you're on our mailing list, if you're following our social media, all of those sorts of things, all of those details, guidelines, eligibility, all of those sorts of pieces will be posted soon. And as soon as that's posted, we'll send that out to everybody on those lists. But to the question, there were a couple of questions. This is separate from the SHPO and from the state budget. This is coming from the federal level. So they're a little bit different as far as where the funding is coming from. Did I get all of those, Kevin?
I think so.
Great. Yeah, stay tuned. Follow our newsletter. You'll get more information.
Emily, I'm correct though that we might be able to partner too. I mean, if you have a successful applicant, they might be able to apply for our funding as well, and then that you're marrying the two funding streams together. So it's a good opportunity for those on the call if you're considering that you might be able to be eligible for both programs. You can really get more bang for your buck to make sure that you're really in a good place.
Yeah, it'll be a timing, it might be a bit of a timing thing, but yes, potentially so.
Our goal is that it's going to work out. But thank you, John. I remembered, I think we talked a little bit before about that. We've had situations before in our grantees who don't reach that 100 days at the time of the application, but part of that grant request is that you're building a stronger programming that might get you a little bit closer to that 100 days. We recognize that there are some that are sheltered and might never reach that. I don't want to discourage you from trying to apply, because if you can make the case that it's a historic, very significant historic resource, and that even being open 50 days, although it might not meet our guidelines, would be very important. And, without this grant funding, it would be catastrophic to the care of that building. So I think you can try. We do see some organizations who do partner with other historical organizations that have programmings that get them more feet in the door, so to speak. And they're either concerts or educational conversations about areas that talk about the local history. There's an organization in North Philadelphia that does that too very well as well. They have Sunday services, but then they have monthly meetings that talk about very engaged local history. And then I think there are other programming that happens there too that's separate from both arts and history also.
Thanks, John. Another question from an anonymous attendee. This is for Karen. Are the wage provisions governed by the Davis-Bacon Act?
Davis-Bacon Act is usually set forth for federal funding that comes through, and their threshold for Davis-Bacon is, I think, 2,500. Whereas we are governed, because we're state funding, is that it complies with the Pennsylvania Prevailing Wage Act. So if your project's in excess of $25,000, you have to meet that requirement. We allow the grantees to contact labor and industry to get their wage determination lists. I think they do, since I see question 4 is coming up asking about certified payroll. I'll answer that because it's the same. We don't ask that you share that certified payroll with our office, but you are meeting that requirement with labor and industry, and I think they often ask for you to provide that certified payroll to them. And
Okay.
we one more thing, we do often ask you to reach out to your legal counsel to see whether or not your project is required to have follow prevailing wage. There are some exceptions depending on the level of intervention or what they consider to be repair.
Thank you. This is a question from Mandy Miller. Does being in a historic neighborhood, is that sufficient for meeting historic building requirements?
How about it could? It depends. There are a lot of times those historic neighborhoods are or have become local, what are known as National Register historic districts. And if someone has taken the time to actually complete that paperwork and has that designation, as long as the church is considered a contributing resource to that historic district, it's very possible that yes, you'd meet that provision. There are different types of historic districts. Some are governed by local ordinance that are considered local historic districts. And if it hasn't ever had that National Register eligibility tied to it, it might not. But we can certainly do a little bit of investigation for you.
I have a question, Karen. When you're talking about new construction projects not qualifying, what about something like an external accessibility ramp to a
Oh,
historic structure?
that's an excellent question. One of the key components, because of the public accessibility, is that we do like to see that historic buildings are accessible to all. So um, I think if your project is an ADA accessible ramp, that is considered ineligible. Yes, it's new construction, but it's a small scaled feature that actually is the code requirement and would be allowable under the program. That's an excellent question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure, we have a couple questions which I'm going to save for the end because they're again about the PA Faithful Fund. So I'll let Emily make the plug at the very end, but this is from a very special attendee named Reverend Betsy Ivy. How long can a congregation have raised money for its capital project for its funding to be applicable to the match?
Oh, thank you, Reverend Ivy. So because we're a reimbursement grant program, if you can, as long as you keep the conversation with me going throughout your quarterly reports, that you're continually making the effort to raise funding. If you don't meet that special January date where we're asking you to have your matching funds in place, that's okay. I realize that fundraising is hard. So you have that 2-year period. What you want to make sure that you're building in as your project schedule is that you leave enough time to actually complete your project. So if you've got a large project and maybe you have raised half of it so far, yes, you can continue raising funding, but we want to make sure that you have that project completed by that September 30th of 2028 date. It's a little wishy-washy, but I'm happy to work with you because it is hard.
Okay, we're almost at the 1 o'clock hour. Karen, I want to thank you so much. That was a really information-rich presentation. We're going to post this on our YouTube page, everyone, so that you can rewatch this webinar, get into the details, and see Karen's contact information because she invited you all to be in touch with her. As Emily mentioned, follow along social media and to our newsletter at Partners for more information about the new PA Faithful Fund. Follow along also for other webinars like this from other states. The Keystone Grant Program is really special. It's a wonderful resource for everyone in the Commonwealth. There are other resources in other states. So do follow along and tell your neighbors from other states as well that we're trying to be a good bridge builder between the government offices as well as our friends at Partners. So Karen, please give join me in giving Karen a round of applause for all the information and thanks for being here today.
Sure, thank you for having me.